For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning, Michael, and welcome to the show.
And the one thing really that's weighing on investors' minds at the moment is the fallout from SVP, the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. I've got more details of that coming up, and country by country. But first of all, let's just concentrate on Asia Pacific. Hong Kong up about 2%. The Hong Kong, the Shanghai Composite up about 0.75%. But you know basically, people are worried about where the contagion of this collapse of the bank is going to be. Some interesting news from China developer Country Garden. They're posting a 2022 loss. I mentioned them merely because it's a further addition to what we know, what we're trying to find out about the property sector in China. It doesn't look too good as far as they're concerned. The usual kind of problems: high interest rates, inflation. And also loan impairment and getting underway again after the COVID-19 lockdowns. I'm going to take your attention to India now. India is being seen by many as a possible alternative as a manufacturing base to China. And Boeing and Apple are two big companies which are going towards India for their manufacturing. We spoke last week, didn't we, about Apple having its own department which is looking at India, and they're also taking some of their iPhone manufacturing there. The problem with India are the usual ones: a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, lack of 100% infrastructure, and all the rest of it. But nevertheless, quite a big vote of confidence from two very big manufacturers, not just Apple, but Boeing. Boeing, $34 billion worth of aero engines aircraft being made for Air India there, which is the largest peacetime purchase order. I'm going to take you to Saudi Arabia. And unsurprisingly, Saudi Aramco has posted record $161 billion profits. Of course, it has. You would expect it to do so, given the oil price has been rising so quickly. One of the comments from it is that still they feel as though, and they wouldn't they, that the world is going to be dependent upon fossil fuels for some time, and therefore it's calling on its own company to increase the construction of more refineries and so on to keep Saudi Aramco where it is right now. Let us therefore turn our attention to the United States. There was a big relief rally on futures market, particularly as Dow futures are concerned, given that the US regulatory authorities said that they would effectively form a backstop towards this bank, the Silicon Valley Bank, which has gone bust. And some of the reasons. It's talking a lot. You're going to hear a lot about this in the future. You're going to hear a lot about how it extended well beyond its risk profile, and it's got outdated technology. The fact of the matter is that the US is looking at this, and the lesson to be drawn is don't have all your eggs in one basket. The UK, now it turns out that HSBC is buying, this has just dropped on the wires now, HSBC, the British bank, or at least the British headquarters bank, is buying the UK unit of SVP, the Silicon Valley Bank. It's legally separated from California. It's bought it for £1. It therefore means that tech companies will trade normally with it until there's some kind of reorganisation. But at the moment, as far as UK tech's concerned, I was going to bring you the story about them asking for government help, but it looks like HSBC has stepped in. One of the reasons it's doing this fairly quickly, of course, is because of the experience of the 2008 banking crisis, which was all about speed and getting things up and running again. Jeremy Hunt is pledging to put the UK onto what he calls the hard road to recovery. That's what his budget is going to be. Big tax cuts can wait till later. That's what he's saying, and it's going to be very, very hard. So I think that this is a classic example of a politician saying, look, it's going to be really nasty, but there will be some pleasurable things, no doubt, in the budget, but there'll be few and far between. The overall message we're getting is it's going to be a hard road to recovery before the UK becomes a prosperous nation again. We sort of know that, don't we? Sunak, the Prime Minister, is talking about bringing some fortitude to the UK versus China and also Russia. Defence spending is going to rise by 2.5% of GDP, and the Foreign Secretary will be putting those proposals to Parliament today to find out if they're approved by the majority there. And I draw your attention to the UK junior doctor strike. Again, not necessarily something directly business-based, but it is the worst example of strike action against the NHS and against the NHS management of this current row of strikes. They want a 35% pay increase. I think they'll be very lucky to get that. But then again, they are saying that over the years, junior doctors, given the kind of work that they do, and given the fact that they are 45% of the medical workforce, deserve something. Again, this will all be down to discussion. And finally, oil. It's gradually creeping up. You can see why, can't you? Relatively soft jobs figures from the United States on Friday means that it may just be that the Fed puts off raising interest rates again when they meet on March, or they announce their decision on March the 22nd. Goldman Sachs, for one, certainly thinks so this morning. And also, whilst Wall Street worries, oil tends to gain as well. That's all that's happening right now. The fundamentals have not changed. That's the global view.
All right, Michael Wilson, good morning. Isn't it shocking that how can a bank run with over 80% of its deposits uninsured? I thought America had something called Dodd-Frank. Please.
Yeah. Well, I think this is once again a case of the stable door being bolted a little too late. As I said, we're going to hear a lot about how the technical services of this particular bank were out of date, and also it actually confined itself to one particular tech sector, and that, you know, with the ups and downs of tech and so on. And I'm sure I don't need to add in for our viewers, particularly the other banks that have been in difficulties. For example, we're looking at Signature, and we're also looking at Silvergate as well. Two other banks which have been... So what the question over the weekend has been, is this the end of tech? I don't think it is. I think, though, it's the normal kind of thing with banking. If you put all your eggs in one basket, one failure tends to escalate all the way through. But it's entirely likely that somebody will come in, not excusing what's happened, I'm just saying this is the process. And HSBC have bought the London arm of it for £1 this morning.
All right, well, looking at Aramco, that's Saudi Arabia's Aramco, and the profit they've made in 1 year, about $161 billion. The conversation also talks about climate change. So while celebrating the fact that they've made such a huge profit in 1 year, climate change activists are also talking about the impact on the environment. What's your take on this, particularly because Saudi Arabia, well, Aramco in its report hasn't said what they'd be doing in that regard. Instead, have said that they're going to increase production to meet demand.
Yeah, I mean, if I were Aramco, I would be listening to those climate protests and saying, well, it's going to cost us a great deal of money to transition, as it will all the oil companies as well. And I'm making no excuses for Aramco, but I just really would point out the reality of it. There's no black and white about this. Sometimes they're in profit, sometimes they're not. And they profited because of the oil price rising. I'm not surprised by these figures at all. I think what's going to be interesting is how it does manage its transition, even though, as you quite rightly say, it's been saying that they're going to increase production, increase infrastructure, because they see no immediate loss of fuel demand, fossil fuel demand in the near future. But again, if I were them, I'd be looking at those transition costs very carefully indeed. Doesn't need to, but I mean, I would be.
Okay, SVB. The Treasury, the U.S. Treasury is providing a backstop, even if they've made it very clear that there will be no bailout. The Federal Reserve is also providing a funding program to protect only those persons that fall within the limit of $250,000. So what happens to unsecured credit? What also happens to those companies that had signed restriction clauses with the SVP? But the question to ask is, shouldn't the Fed pause at this point, considering the fact that the jobs figures that came out on Friday were not so fine? Very mixed. Unemployment rate went up to 3.6%, higher than the 3.4 that was expected. What will you be imagining that the Federal Reserve will do against the background of talks about rates to be hiked again by about 0.5 percentage points? And then India, yes, alternative to China. But we understand that India has many hurdles. How will India address those hurdles beyond the ambition behind Made in India and Boeing striking a deal with Air India or Apple looking in the direction of India, as is the case with other countries? Will it be that easy to dislodge China, which seems to have better scale and speed?
As far as the Fed's concerned, if I were them on March the 22nd, I would announce that they've done absolutely nothing. They don't particularly want to upset the banking sector, but things may have changed by March the 22nd. As far as the jobs concerned, a very mixed picture, yes. Certainly a softer picture about employment, but hiring was hot. So it's very difficult to actually draw a straight line across what's going on in the United States. Again, I put my trust in something which is the largest economy in the world, and I think it probably is growing quite hard. But I think it could be Goldman Sachs saying this morning, or overnight at least, that they think the Fed will do nothing for its March the 22nd meeting. What it does after that depends on that. I don't know. I think it's a long, long way ahead in these times when things seem to change every day. India, yeah, good headlines. As I keep saying, you've got the top end of it, which is actually doing quite well, and is saying, we're going to host this, and we're going to be the factory of the world, and all the rest of it. The reality is very, very different. The reality is red tape, bureaucracy, lack of infrastructure, and enormous equality gap within the country itself. So I feel as though it's taking over from China, and it's not a demand economy in the same way that China is, as I understand it. That's a long way off. I'm merely quoting that because Boeing and Apple are two big names, and they've gone to India for that work. Whether or not Boeing will manage to get paid for its £32 billion order is another matter altogether.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Now for business updates across the African continent, Rotus Odiri is here. Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, all. We begin in Anambra. The governor, Soludo, says there was a bankers committee meeting yesterday, and that central bank governor, of course, he's a former central bank governor, current central bank governor, Gordon Emefiele, confirmed to him that all the directive had been sent to banks that they can start using old notes. We go to SVB, which is the talk of the town. Tech firms have been impacted. So Future Africa put out a notice. So the Chipper Cash, the Ugandan co-founder, with respect to how they've been. Let's quickly take a look at Future Africa and what they said. Said at the second paragraph, as Future Africa, we enjoyed a great collaborative relationship with Silicon Valley Bank, and we mourn its loss alongside many startups. And it says, as many as you know, that what happened. But the main issue, if we jump to the next notice, where they said we can report Future Africa's second paragraph and its funds have minimal exposure to Silicon Valley Bank. We go to Chipper Cash and their co-founder, who is from Uganda. Chipper Cash is a fintech firm, Ham Saranjoji, the Ugandan co-founder. He says that their exposure is only about $1 million. Where is that? Okay, this is Inya Boyeji saying that Future Africa wasn't built on a decade-long relationship with Silicon Bank. It was built on faith, and he was having faith that their funds won't go anywhere. So if we look at Saranjoji's post, he says that do we have that? Okay, I guess we don't have it. But he basically said that Chipper Cash exposure is only $1 million. And then finally, Instagram scams are still very, very prevalent. I got got, but can you imagine? But I'm pursuing it. But yeah, that's our African update for today.
All right. I mean, quite very sad. And a couple of things about Silicon Valley Bank. So sometimes you will look and say, yes, you don't need to overregulate them. But the truth is you need to. And I remember all the arguments around when Dodd-Frank was passed. Because the question is, how can a bank, I asked Michael Wilson that question.
I have an answer for you.
How can a bank have over 80% of its deposit uninsured?
The FDIC only insures up to $250,000.
Yeah.
That's the cap.
Yeah. Silicon
Valley Bank, most of the depositors were venture capital funds.
Yes.
And these venture capital funds were the ones that raised a lot of money from startups.
Yes.
So their deposits tripled in less than 2 years.
So what was the hedge?
So they think the hedge was long duration bonds. They bought bonds that were long term, and the issue is that when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates, bond prices fell, they collapsed, which impacted their assets. When you take a lot of deposits from customers, you have to either lend out those deposits with interest rates so you have a spread.
So what was the hedge?
The hedge was the bonds now. So
No, what was the hedge in the case that the bonds fell?
No, but the bonds themselves are a hedge on the deposits because deposits are liabilities. So that was you can't keep having hedge upon hedge upon hedge. You only have one hedge to protect the liabilities. So that's the issue.
But now it's gone bust. That's what we're saying. It's another rock.
But now they've set up a protection for them.
You talked about the Anambra governor.
Yes.
Saying banks should take old notes based on a phone conversation.
Yes.
He said he had with the CBN governor.
Yes.
I think what people just want is clarity.
Yes, sir.
And that clarity will be provided by the CBN making a proper pronouncement on it. In any case, the court has ruled, and we expect the CBN to respect the ruling of the court.
Have you used any old notes this weekend? Have any of you used
I
old
tried.
notes?
Nobody
They're not
collects it from
accepting it.
I
The
tried.
businesses are not accepting the
tried.
old notes.
I wish you could give us the detail of that scam because it would tell us why some people fall scam to.
I'll
When
get
it's
into it
too
tomorrow.
good to be true, it probably is too
I'll
good to
get
be
into
true.
it tomorrow.
As for SVB, is the Nigerian government doing anything
Not
to
yet,
protect
though.
our
We
startups?
haven't heard anything.
Or we are not exposed significantly?
We're exposed though.